is a performance entitled Leaps and Bounds, a one-woman show about faith, ecology, and the global economy, performed and conceived by Aveni, Dresden in collaboration with Chef Myers right here at 8 p.m. on Monday, September 27th. You're all invited. And now I want to introduce tonight's lecturer, which is Dr. Aveni. Professor Aveni is the Russell B. Colby Professor of Astronomy and Anthropology. He serves appointments in the departments of Physics and Astronomy and Sociology and Anthropology at Colgate University, where he has taught since 1963. Dr. Aveni helped develop the field of archaeoastronomy and is now considered one of the founders of Mesoamerican archaeoastronomy, in particular for his research in the astronomical history of the Mayan Indians of ancient Mexico. Tonight, Dr. Aveni's lecture deals with the Mayan mystery of 2012. And without further ado, I'll present you.
Thank you, Rosario. You now know what a special place Marlboro is. Not like Colgate. Very different. A little smaller. That's another talk. Unless you've resided on another planet, you're probably well aware that on December the 21st, 2012, just 828 days from today, the great odometer of Maya time, the long count, will turn over. Everything goes back to zero. Remember the odometer on Dad's car turning 100,000 miles? Big deal. Big difference between this time odometer and my dad's odometer is that that car was headed for the junkyard, but there will be a renewal of time when that cycle turns over. And if you've been on the internet, you're probably well aware that we're either in for a big blowout, and you read the caption, a couple of Wall Street guys walking around the corner, and it says, on the other hand, it's not the end of the world. The four horsemen of the apocalypse. No, either a big blow-up or a big bliss-out. It's kind of interesting that the gurus of 2012, whom I like to call affectionately the Y12ers, who write about this and who write books about this. I did a survey in the Brattleboro bookstores and found at least 7 different 2012 books. Couldn't find my own. I'm the egghead who comes along at the end of the day and says, can we think about this a little further? A big blow-up or a big bliss-out? What's it going to be? Well, I know this movie was shown on campus last night. You went to see it. Oh. Yeah, great, great. Didn't you like John Cusack? Wasn't that one of his best roles, huh? Weird characters. And the special effects man, who I know very well, lives down in Nashville, met with him about a year ago. I think he had the best part of that movie. There are amazing special effects. The story itself, I don't know. I don't review movies. But this is the scenario of the big apocalypse that's going to happen. And if you are too busy to follow all of this, I recommend you go to Jeff Stray's website. He recommends that. He says that his website, Diagnosis, packs the most significant parts of the 2012 message into bite-sized packages for busy people to digest on their lunch hour. So you can keep up with the 2012 developments by going to that website. If you Google Maya 2012 end of the world, you're going to come up with about 220,000 hits. So this is a very hot topic. Lawrence Joseph, who was the author of Apocalypse 2012, says that that date will be more tumultuous, catastrophic, and revelatory than any other year in human history. And on the back of his book jacket, he says it'll make you think twice about your retirement plans. There's some people here thinking about retiring. Don't even do your Christmas shopping. What does Joseph tell us? Well, a lot of bad things are going to happen. There'll be supergiant flares on the sun. You can read this for yourself. Of course, this happens at the peak of the solar cycle, which is indeed 2012. The Earth's magnetic field will undergo a reversal. There will be a planetary lineup that will uproot megabursts of imprisoned radiation trapped in the sun for thousands of years, deadlier than any Earth has encountered since Homo sapiens have been around. Tune in the History Channel, the Learning Channel. You'll find these programs. That's a flare on the sun, by the way. It does emit about 1,000 nuclear bombs worth of energy every second, so it's an awesome force, a solar flare. And the solar flares will peak toward 2012, as they have on an 11-year cycle since, well, at least since the sun began, which is even before the Earth began. That's the apocalyptic scenario. What about the Blitza? Well, there is another scenario that contends that we are in for a transformation of universal consciousness that will suddenly come over us. Shift happens is the motto. The great cosmic shift will happen. And among the many proponents of this cosmic shift are Carl Johann Kalman, whose book, The Maya Calendar and the Transformation of Consciousness, advocates a very rapidly evolving theory of evolution in which great transformations take place according to a kind of a mathematical formula that converges. The end of World War II was the last great transformation. 2012 is the next one. I think the invention of the computer fits somewhere in there, but these transformations take place on an accelerated scale and will culminate not on December 21, 2012, but according to him, on December 11, 2011. So he has his own date. Calvin says we can prepare for this shift of consciousness by cleansing the colon with bentonite clay, that we might be more receptive to the pranic energy. We might be more receptive to the pranic energy. There are also books by one John Major Jenkins, who has made a habit of writing books. It takes me 3 or 4 years to do a book. He seems to be able to do one in about 8 months. His latest on 2012 is just out. His original book that advocates the theory of the great cosmic alignment, there you see Maya cosmogenesis, and you can see on the cover what he talks about inside, which is that the sun will align with the womb of the galaxy, which is to say the center of our galaxy, the great rift of the galaxy, that will happen on December 21, 2012, and it is then, by that occultation of the center of the galaxy, the black hole that lies at the center of the galaxy, that there will be this sudden transformation that will come over all of us. Jose Arguelles, if you're old enough to have been around in 1987, is another advocate of the 2012 new consciousness, the new wave of consciousness. He wrote a book called The Mayan Factor, Path Beyond Technology, and he's the guy who said that if we all get together on August 13, 1987, which is another turnover point in time, and hold hands all the way around the world, we will be sensitive to this change. But you have to be at places where the energy comes, and for example, Pikes Peak in Giza, where the pyramids are located, only certain points on the globe, only at certain points is one receptive to this kind of energy. It'll be the most opportune time in 2012, says Arguelles, to reconnect with the upgrading of the light-life radiogenetic process at the acupuncture points, the all-planetary light body grid points in the body of Mother Earth. I have a student who's been trying to decipher the meaning of that sentence for about 2 weeks, so he hasn't come up with anything yet. But it is interesting how many people can read scientific jargon like this and think to themselves, well, if it's science and if it's mathematical, and he's using these terms, there must be some truth to it. These diagrams from Arguelles' book talk about the galaxy, and I'm going to get back to talking about that word galactic and the galaxy. It's a real buzzword, and here you can see the planetary circuit and the solar circuit and the galactic channel, the resonant field model. Over here, the galactic code informing the Earth's magnetosphere, which looks surprisingly anthropomorphic. Various kinds of encoded symbols, which you can understand if you are adept, if you are gifted to understand it. Now, we're talking here about secret knowledge that goes all the way back to biblical decoding, so I'm not telling you anything new, as we'll see when we get into this. So we're going to get into it, and what I'm going to do is to talk about what this 2012 may have meant to the Maya, who were the ones who authored this great cycle, the long count. We'll talk a little bit about that. That's part one. Part two, what it might mean to us, what people say it might mean to us. I could have given you a dose of that already. And then finally, I think the most important part, and I dwell on it in my book, and that is why the interest of American pop culture, this phenomenon. For the French and the Japanese are not interested in this, but American pop culture is. Why is that? That's really the fundamental question. I was talking to a reporter recently saying, you know, the story is about us. It's not about the Maya, and it's not about why 12 course. It's really about us. Why are we so apocalyptically oriented? So we'll deal with that. If you have to leave early, buy the book on the way out, and you'll get all the answers. They're all in there. Follow that recipe. So to the Maya. The Maya, you were just looking at the ruins of Tikal, who built large cities. Tikal housed over 100,000 people at its peak in the 7th century. It had a dynasty that lasted 500 years. Put that, Carol and I were just talking, think of how long we've lasted here as Americans since 1776. Not very long. What kept them together? What kept that culture glued together? How did they manage to make a paradise, what looks like a paradise, with fantastic architecture, with books, literature, mathematics, and astronomy, in what looks to us like an uninhabitable jungle? They did so, and so we admire them for it. They give us evidence of this long count in this 2012 that we're talking about in two forms. There are two forms of evidence. One is in the carved monuments called stelae. Here you see Stela B at the ruins of Copan, high relief. And then on the other side, the codices, which are made of bark paper, the paper of the fig tree, which is lime-coated and painted with various dyes. Only 3 of those books survived. They were burned by the Spaniards, the conquistadores, who came here. And one of them writes, we found among these people a number of books written with their characters, but as they could have had nothing to do with matters other than the devil, we burned them all, which they read. And Father Diego de Landa, who was one of the inquisitors, talks about a bonfire in the church of Mani in Yucatan, where he piled these books as high as the door of the church and burned them. So, but we do have 3 books that survive, and here you can see the Maya numbers and the glyphs, and we won't be able to take lessons in that today. But I'll tell you a little bit about this long count cycle, because we're all fascinated by it. It's one of the longest time counts, over 5,000 years long. And here it appears in a drawing of that stela that I just showed you. On the front side, you have what was for a long time thought to be a god, but now that we understand about 3/4 of the Maya writing, we know to have been a king. He is one Washakla Hulubakawil, also known as 18 Rabbit. He was the king of Copan in the 8th century. A rather long period of rule he had, some 52 years before he was beheaded by the ruler of Quiriguá, who attacked Copan. You see him here holding a ceremonial bar. There are his hands. He has a huge headdress. His ancestors are up in the top of that headdress. And he is equipped with a double-barreled holster of stingray spines, which he's about to use to perforate the tip of his penis, offering blood to the gods. Now think about this before you get carried away with the gore. I'm not talking History Channel gore here. I'm talking about perforating the organ of fertility. And then taking the droplets of blood, not gushing spouts of blood, but droplets of blood, collecting it on parchment paper, burning it, and sending it up to the gods, so that the blood then becomes the mortar that holds this culture together. What Mr. Washakla is doing is claiming his right to rule. He is legitimating his authority by sacrificing blood, which he no doubt did in public, to show the bond between the dynasty and the gods. For we, the dynastic rulers, are the children of God. The message on this stela is not forward-directed. It's not telling us about some distant day in the future. It's directed to the past. It's telling us that we are rooted in the past. The same way a politician might say, I stand on the principles of Lincoln, Washington, Moses, if I dare say. You know, that's how far back I go. And he's probably proclaiming it. And on the side, you see the long count. These numbers begin with the day, the 20-day month, the year, the score of years, 20 years, called a katun, and the score of years, 400-year periods. This is the base 20 system that they count in. Why 20? I think because they counted on the fingers and the toes originally, and so they have a base 20 system. The dots that you see here represent ones, like the tips of the fingers that you count with, 1, 2, 3, 4. And when you count a handful, you have 5. and so you hold your hand like this and it becomes a bar. So all of these mathematical notations are not so complicated. They come from human gestures, from the body count, from the fingers and the toes. And what you can see here is that the 15th Katun, the 15th score of years, has just overturned. This would be like a decade marker. Not a century marker, but a decade marker. And what you read here in the hieroglyphs that have been translated are that this king is the owner of this Katun. It is his Katun. It is his 20-year cycle. He is the one who is connected with the gods, and then he has all of his titles attached to it. All of the Maya stelae, all 900 of them that have been excavated and studied, pertain to dynastic history and the connection between the ruler and the gods. They are methods of legitimizing the authority and projecting it into the past. Very little about the future. Here is the opening day of the last long count, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, or as it's written, 13, 0, 0, 0, 0. You can see the 13. 1, 2, 3, that's 3, and 2 bars, 5, 10. So it is on this day that what happened? Well, you can read this material. It's a little bit difficult to interpret, but you can see the word stone. They set the stone, they set the 3-stone hearth in place. What happened on that occasion was that the Yash-Osh Tunal, the first 3-stone place on earth, was established. What means 3 stone? Well, if you go to a Maya hut today, you see the Maya in Yucatan still live this way. The hearth always has 3 big round stones, and that's where they make the fire and they do the cooking, and it's the center of their universe, the center of the house. So the gods established the 3-stone hearth here on earth at the beginning of that time cycle. And evidently, they'll do it again. They'll do it at the round of the next time cycle. Nothing here about destruction, nothing about any cosmic bliss out. At least I don't see it in the record, so I'm not clear about where some of my Y12 people who write these books get this information. I don't know it. I could be wrong. Here is some evidence that comes from these parchment, these books, these texts made out of this tree bark. It doesn't look too good. This is page 74 of the Dresden Codex, the last page. I replicated in the text and talk about it. A whole lot of rainfall going on. From what I understand, southern Vermont could use some of this. But you wouldn't want this in the proportions when it was alleged to have come here in the flood myth. Here is the sky serpent vomiting water. Here an ancient lunar deity pouring water from the sky. Here a male deity holding a lances of rain. They are blue lances like lightning spokes coming down, and water emanating from an eclipse cliff. Was this the end of the world by flood? There are these Noachian myths all over the world, and where do they come from? Well, go and talk to somebody in the lower 9th Ward of New Orleans if you want to talk about a flood myth. There will be stories coming from that terrible disaster of Katrina 5 years ago that will go on for centuries and become the great story of the flood. So these biblical and other cultural stories about these disasters do not necessarily tell of the end of the world that's to come, or the end of the entire world. They are culturally rooted myths. And when I say myth, I don't mean there's no truth to it. But they don't have this universal appeal that we seem to want to grab onto. That. Well, I get ahead of myself. Let me put on my astronomer's hat. And as I do, I'll tell you how I got into this stuff. It certainly wasn't to make money writing books, because John Major Jenkins outsells me about 25 to 1. He's the flavor of the month. He's having his 15 minutes, more like a year and a half. Unfortunately, I have a day job. I don't have to do this. But I'll tell you the truth, that I got into an email correspondence with a high school student, a couple of high school students, who were quite worried about this 2012. And they said they and their friends had been reading some of this literature about the end of the world, the planets misaligning, what's going to happen, is there any future for them? And at first I thought they were having me on. Lorraine and I read these emails together, and finally I got connected with this young student up in Nova Scotia, Dylan O'Corn, to whom I dedicated my book. And I really decided that I ought to look into it. Why me? Well, I'm trained in astronomy, so I know a little bit about planetary lineups, and I study the Maya. So that's why I did it. It's been rewarding to talk to young people about this subject, and well, I'm even talking to some people who were contemplating suicide in the year 2012. So some people take these omens very, very seriously. It's kind of frightening. I want to show you the astronomy part of it. Short talk. I haven't got time to go through all of it. But I think I've justified for you that the Maya were keeping track of their history, really concerned with rooting their history in the past. Where does the astronomy come in? Well, here's the sunspot cycle. And it peaks every 11 years, last peaking around the year 2001, more or less 2001. And 11 years from now, in 2012, you can see here the predictions about the magnetic flux coming from the sun. And the peak in 2012, it does occur in 2012, is a little bit higher than normal. Not as high as it was in 1958, which was a banner year for sunspots. And the world, I don't think, ended in 1958, did it? Or if it did, it bypassed me. I remember I was having a good time in 1958 going to school. But nothing terribly disastrous in the data. And I consulted with solar physicists who study the sun, and they don't think anything unusual is going to happen. What about that planetary lineup that's going to tear the Earth apart that Mr. Joseph talks about? Well, here you have what the solar system will look like on the day of that great overturning, that return to zero in the year 2012. There's the Earth, and I guess yet Jupiter and Saturn are lined up with the Earth. All the other planets are over here. And there's nothing unusual or extraordinary about any planetary lineup that I know about. Now, maybe the solar system will shift its course. I'm fascinated by the word galactic, and I contacted my friend, the psychologist, Melissa Veronich, and I asked her, what is it about galactic? Everybody's so fascinated with the galactic polity, the galactic predictions, the galactic myth. And she said it's one of these words in our culture that you can't grasp. I mean, something on a galactic scale, it's immense. That's our galaxy. It's 240,000 light years from one end to end. The other end, and it's phenomenal distance. We are among, our sun is among 250 billion stars that inhabit that galaxy. We live in galactic suburbia, about 2/3 of the way between the center and the outer edge. Amidst all the interstellar pollution that's there, it's the stuff we came from, that dark, murky gap of interstellar matter. It's all too vast to complicated to understand, Melissa tells me, and that's why people have to use the word. They have to get used to it by using the word even if they don't understand the meaning. So that's where we have all this galactic stuff. Now, if you look at this from the inside, of course, this is the outside view, and no, we didn't send a satellite out there to take that picture. This is a picture of another galaxy, about 7 million light years away. These stars are all members of our own galaxy, nearby. And so that's what we would look like. And if we looked around this plane, we would see a beautiful carpet of white that goes through the sky that southern Vermonters get a chance to see, whereas people in New York and LA and Pittsburgh don't. And that, of course, is the Milky Way, the beautiful summer Milky Way. That's the plane of the galaxy. Well, what about 2012? What's going to happen in 2012? Well, according to John Major Jenkins, the sun on the solstice, and we're not going to see this too well because the lights are a little bright. If you could just cut the lights a little, we might see it better. And if you can't, I'll just describe it for you. But here is the sun on December 21st, and it slowly moves, carrying the constellations with it, toward the galaxy. And that's the galaxy there. And my apologies that you can't see it, but it's this band of light. Yeah, that's a little better. Here is the center of the galaxy. It's the thick part as we look at it. And when the sun gets there, in that zone, it's supposed to be 2012. Well, we're already there. And in fact, we've been passing through that zone since at least 1850. And it's going to take us until about 2250 before we get out of it. So yes, the sun at the solstice, this turnaround point of the sun, the first day of winter, is passing through the core of the galaxy, which I don't think was ever known as a womb to the Maya, nor was it ever known as a tree, which is another part of the mythology that goes down here. It, in fact, was the roadway of the dead, the Maya tell us. But that passage occurs over the course of about 4,000 years. So if you're a golfer, it's a little bit like contemplating a 6-foot putt into a hole about twice the size of a basketball. We're talking about a very large zone, not a happening that's going to occur on one day. But the really interesting question that I have, I've spent the most time on this in the last part, is what is it about us? What is it about our culture, American popular culture, that causes us to be so fascinated with apocalyptic endings? For we really are quite special and unique in this regard. Although my book now being translated into Russian, my translator told me, well, you know, the Russians are interested in apocalypse too. And of course, it goes back to the Jewish history and the Bible. The Egyptians were interested in apocalypse, but we are really focused on it in popular culture. And I ask you to pull out a dollar bill and turn it over. And you'll see part of the answer. Well, don't do this now. Do it in the quiet of your living room. And on the back, do you ever notice that funny-looking, mysterious eye and pyramid and stuff written in Latin of 1776? What is that doing on the back of a dollar bill, American currency? And the translation of the Latin down on the bottom, Novus Ordo Seclorum, comes from Virgil, of all places, so it's pretty old. It says, a new order of the ages. A new order of the ages. And the founding fathers who conceived of this establishment here really did think that there would be a new order. A new order would be established in America, and we're, with our manifest destiny, kind of different from the other cultures. We've thrown our arms open to all the other cultures to come in, all of the immigrants coming from abroad, and the first of these, take you all the way back to the Mayflower, just a little bit east of here, were religious radicals. America was the spawning ground for religious radicals. Those Puritans who came here and eventually weren't even tolerated in Boston. The Puritans and Pilgrims weren't even tolerated in Boston, Providence, or New Haven. I have to tell you this, you know it. They came to southern Vermont and they came to central New York. They went out along the Erie Canal, taking with them their bizarre religious ideas. Brigham Young was here, started here before he got to Palmyra. And my part of the world, which is the same as yours, it's just a little bit west of here, we call it the burned over district, not jokingly, but because it was so burned over with religious radicalism in the 1850s. I'm fond of telling my students, many of whom come from urban areas, you know, if you think Hamilton, New York is a dull place, you should have been here 150 years ago. It was a hot, seething hotbed of religious radicalism. And much of that radicalism was based on literal interpretations of biblical texts. New cults were founded, the Oneida community, the Amana community farther west, experimental living, utopias. This was the Novus Ordo Seclorum that was established here. Just to give you one example, and the next book I'm writing is more about apocalyptic American religion in a general sense. I hope to get to do this if the world doesn't come to an end. That's my plan. I'm going to withhold doing too much research, though, on it, because I don't want to waste the precious time I have left. This is the famous chart that was used by Pastor William Miller in the 1830s and 40s when he went around lecturing to his Millerite cult in central New York about the forthcoming end of the world. And you can see he was a pretty mathematical guy. In this case, the numbers didn't come from the Maya calendar. Instead, they came from the Bible. And you can see the bottom line of all that math points to 1843. In fact, on the afternoon of October 22, 1843, he said that is when the world will come to an end. In this case, it will come via the second coming of Christ, and we should go up on the roofs of our houses and prepare for it. They did. It didn't happen. His followers chastised him. There was a recalculation of the date to 1844. This always happens when there are these calculations. We made a mistake in the calculation. And, well, it's a long and sad story what happened to Miller. He was disavowed and disallowed in his cult. He wasn't accepted back into the Protestant church. And he died a horrible death, having had his 15 minutes of fame. And his chart in the public domain, so I got to use it as an illustration without paying for it in my book. A very interesting interpretation of biblical time, taken very, very literally. I don't have time to give the talk about that. I could give another talk about his interpretation of the book of Daniel, where he interprets the 70-day warning as a 70-year warning, which is 1 day of the precession of the equinoxes, the moving of the earth on its axis, which is all tied into this. Fascinating stuff. I think that the modern take on this apocalypticism gets traced back to one book called Hamlet's Bill. It's published in the late 60s. And in it, the authors advocate that all cultures are connected by the movement of the sun in the zodiac and its passage from one constellation to the next, not during the course of the year, but the passage of the date of the year through the zodiac, which takes 26,000 years as the Earth wobbles on its axis and causes our first day of spring to move very slowly, for example. In the case of 2012, Jenkins has chosen to select the first day of winter. I know why not. Not why. You can select any day you want. But in this theory, they follow the movement of the equinox, which moves slowly from constellation to constellation. And the theory was that every time it changes from one constellation to the next, there is the dawning of a new age. There is a reinvention or re-envisioning of human culture. It has happened before. It has happened before. Once the equinox sun was in Taurus, and there you see the sun located between the horns of Taurus, just as it is in Egyptian and Minoan iconography. You can see on the horns of the bull, there is always the sun disk, and even in the Minoan Crete, you see that sun disk there. This was the realization of the passage of the sun into a new constellation in the beginning of a new age. 2,000 years later, the sun passed into Aries, whence Nebuchadnezzar ruled, and the Babylonian Empire came to fruition. Then it was in our year 0, or close to 0 or 1, which was the coming of Christ, whence the fishes associated with the mythology of Christ. And the next age will come. Well, how many of you are old enough to remember the Broadway musical Hair? Now re-envisioned itself. And that wonderful song all of my old hippie students used to love, the Age of Aquarius. Do you remember the name of the group? Fifth Dimension. Tell them what he wanted. Tell them what he wanted. The Fifth Dimension. This is the dawning of the Age of Aquarius. And I remember my students being terribly dejected when we sat down and made the calculation. How long is it going to take the sun to get to Aquarius in the dawning of the new age? The answer is 2730 AD. So it isn't even there yet. But kids told me at that time, the hell with it, we're going to party anyway. So they did. But the idea, you see here, is that the ages of humanity are star-fixed. This is really interesting to contemplate. Our human ages are fixed in the stars. For as above, so below, the fundamental dictate of astrology. It's all preordained. It's all secret knowledge. It's all happened. It only has to play itself out here. And if you're adept enough to tune in to these cosmic vibes, then you will know the future. So we're talking here about the history of magic, which is a rather vast subject that we take huge interest in. Well, I know even young people remember Comet Hale-Bopp, but did you know that the Comet Hale-Bopp 1997, very close to the millennium, Y2K, was going to be the time when the gates of heaven would open. That was one of these openings in time where we could be taken into the new revelation. In this case, Comet Hale-Bopp would pick us up if we belong to Heaven's Gate and take us out to this other culture which is beyond the earth. As you may know, Marshall Applewhite, who was on the cover of Time magazine, he and his cult committed mass suicide in anticipation of this event. So this is, I mean, we make light of it here, but this kind of development is taken very seriously by many, many people. And I'm kind of trying to treat this as a teachable moment, you know. I mean, let people know a little bit more about this, because there are people who are really scared about what may go on. What's interesting about the current wave of American apocalypticism and American re-envisioning cosmic consciousness, both of these, is that you have to be in the right place. And so sacred travel is now burgeoning. You can sign up for trips to places in 2012, places around the world where you should be. Stonehenge is one of them. The pyramids are another. Of course, many ruins in Mexico. Some ads for sacred travel. My favorite place where people are now gearing up is the pyramid of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza, where if you go on the equinox of September the 20th, you can see the shadow of the serpent. This is the descending serpent, Quetzalcoatl, who comes down to us, they say. There you see his head carved in stone and the diamonds of light that represent his body. It's an effect made by the shadow that comes from the edge of the building on the balustrade, and it happens right around the equinox. Ray and I go very, very frequently, and I used to go to study how it works. Did they believe it? Did the Maya know it? I got far more interested in the people when I went there. And people come from all over the world. Many of them have their own private shaman. You know, I don't think they ever heard to rent a shaman, but you can get your own shaman and go there and see this event. 60,000 people turned out the last time. And here you can see, well, I remember saying in one of my lectures, they holding a naked babe up to get the light from Quetzalcoatl And I used that terminology. At the end of the lecture, someone came down and said, I didn't see any naked woman in that slide. No, it's a baby. It's a baby, naked baby. A naked baby. And there you see the people standing there. This comes from a poster in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I think it's very creative. It's what I'm going to do when I retire. I'm going to make these little mixers for cocktails. So who are these people? I don't mean these Mexican people. Who are these people that follow these strange religious cults in the 2012 belief? Well, the historian Wilhelm Schwartz wrote a really interesting book before Y2K, in 1987, about anticipating the millennium. And he summarized half a dozen basic characteristics of the behavior of people who are approaching the end of the century, fin de siècle. And he traces all the years back in 1899, 1699, 1099, what were people doing? What did they write about? And he claims, and I think there's some good evidence of this, that among all these people there is a feeling of joy. Despite the fact that there's a looming disaster about to happen, there's a feeling of joy. And I was speaking at lunch to one of you about that kind of destruction of the world is the great leveler, isn't it? Puts me on the same level as Donald Trump. Wow, that makes me feel kind of good, even if I'll be dead. But we're all on the same level when the world comes to an end. There's joy. The moment of change is upon us, he says. In other words, we just happen to be here at the time when this world is going to come to an end. And that's why I think you see so many end-of-the-world predictions going back in time in America. I just Googled up 2006, and there were 13 predictions of the end of the world that year. Supposed to have ended that year. Nuclear holocaust, an Islamic Armageddon, earthquake, tsunami. That was a big time for tsunami, so that tsunami can end the world. A whole range of other things, and one was a second coming in the very Basilica of St. Peter, which would have been a phenomenon to witness, but none of that happened. So every year, there is also the feeling that the event at the end of time will open the doorway to renewal, that there will be renewal, there will be a rapture. This comes from the Roman Catholic faith. There will be a rapture, that you have the Armageddon and the rapture, so you have both the apocalypse and the bliss out, if you could weather the apocalypse by believing. There is a polar shift that goes from decay to rejuvenation. They use this term polar shift, which is where I think the magnetic field shift comes in. Strange stirrings of delight, and the knowledge is secretly encoded astronomically. There's always some kind of math that you have to do with the Mayan calendar in this case to get to it. I added one more point after my study of these endings of time, and that is that the knowledge is always professed to come from far away. That is from the lost tribes of Israel. That's where it came in the last century. They were our aliens. Today it comes from the aliens. Or the Maya, or the Egyptians. The Maya are having their hour right now. The aliens here are relevant because if you look at 2012 and you Google up all these sites, aliens are very much a part of the 2012 mythology. Here's a picture of aliens as they were conceived 200 years ago, allegedly observed through a telescope on the surface of the moon. And don't they look contemporary? Here you see an a race of humanoid-looking beings with bat wings. There, a mother nursing her baby, and off in the background, somebody flying off into the mountains. And these people peacefully coexist next to a race of Pooh Bears, I suppose, who are also nursing their babies. I mean, they're legitimate moms and dads. And here in the background, you see what looks suspiciously like a Maya hut. So that this wonderful hoax kind of anticipates what aliens are going to be 200 years later. Now, they graduated, these aliens have. This is a little compendium of aliens going all the way back to the 1940s. And they have certainly varied in size and in shape. When I was a kid, in school in the 50s, they were here for lunch, namely us. And all of these horror movies of the 50s that used to tingle my spine gave way ultimately to benign aliens who had kind of squishy rubber thumbs and you could poke at your belly with them, E.T. But now we've got the aliens coming for lunch again. You saw that horrible Jack Nicholson movie, Mars Attacks, and they're right back to eating us again. They can't make up their mind. Yeah, in between, during that sensitive biological era, they were here to probe us with needles and test us experiment with us. So these are the people from afar who harbor the secret knowledge. If you think I'm joking with you, I'm going to make a quote by Frank Drake. Frank Drake is the head of SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, a legitimate scientist, taught at Cornell for many years. He was asked by a reporter, well, what would you anticipate when contact is made? Feeling fairly sure that contact would be made. What are we going to get from this? And this was his quote. He said, I fully expect an alien civilization to bequeath us vast, useful libraries of information to do with as we wish. This Encyclopedia Galactica will create the potential for improvements in our lives that we can't predict. Another even more stirring renaissance will be fueled by the wealth of alien scientific, technical, and sociological information that awaits us. We may discover the secret of immortality, thus spake Frank Drake. So you see, this kind of knowledge proffered by the good professor, I think is not so terribly different from this awakening of a new consciousness that some Y12 gurus say is going to happen. We are so tuned to it. Why? Well, I think it may have a lot to do with the age we live in. We could just roll it back to to 911 and all the horrible things that have happened since then. The much over-reported disasters that take place, admittedly terrible disasters, but Islamic fundamentalism, fear and mistrust of government. I was listening on the radio station that interviewed me this morning. Before that, they had a program on about why we shouldn't believe anything that anybody tells us anymore. So we live in a very uncertain age, filled with trust and mistrust and fear, where we reach outward. We eagerly reach outward to other places, to other civilizations and cultures. The Maya are having their moment in the sun because their cycle happens to overturn in the year 2012, but I hope my book will convince you that that's not the Maya message. The Maya message is not intended for us. It's intended for the Maya, and it doesn't seem to have anything to do, as far as I can understand, with the world coming to an end. I asked the Maya shaman what he thought 2012 would bring, that overturning of time, and he said, well, I hope that it will bring peace to the world, that we will reconsider the wrong things we did. He gave me the same answer anybody would give you about why they celebrate New Year's Eve or Mardi Gras or any other end of a cycle of time, regardless of how small it is. Even if it's just a Sunday night where you're getting ready to go back to work on Monday morning. I'm going to do it right this week. I really messed up last week. And you get the Sunday night jitters. I still do, even as a teacher, about going on Monday morning. I've got to make my students better and better citizens and all of that. Any ending of time usually kind of finishes up with a party. That's what they do down in New Orleans. But then the next day, of course, you purify yourself, you begin anew, you pick up the pieces, and you go ahead. And I think that's probably the fundamental message for 2012. And as far as ends of the world are concerned, bliss outs and blow ups, I've got to dedicate this talk to the Bard himself, who said, I'll put a little spin on it, the whole issue may lie within ourselves and not within our stars. So that's my opinion. Thank you, and I'll take questions. Who's first? No question is a stupid question. Sir.
The 26,000-year cycle is what?
Yeah, went over that pretty fast, didn't I? It is a cycle of the movement of the Earth's axis against the stars. The Earth's axis wobbles in a period of 26,000 years. It does so because the sun and the moon exert gravitational forces on the Earth's bulge at the equator. But that doesn't matter, that's physics. It takes 26,000 years to go around. As a result, our pole star changes. It is now Polaris. Someday it will be Vega. In the past, it was a faint star on the tail of Draco the dragon. The Egyptians worshipped it. So it points to different stars. That axis gives us different north stars. Also, the ecliptic, the band through which the planets, the sun and the moon travel, will also move. And the sun, on any given date, your birthday, the first day of summer, will slowly migrate. And it will take 2,000 years, give or take, for the sun to move through one of your zodiacal signs. You know, what's your sign? Everybody has a sign. There are 12 signs. 2,000 years is kind of interesting, because if you take 12 zodiacal signs and divide it into 26,000 years, you get just about 2,000 years per sign. And that's where a lot of the material derived from Augustine and other philosophers about the overturning of time every 2,000 years, every 2 millennia, it connects. And that was the root of this book, Hamlet's Mill, that says that this cycle of precession of the equinoxes, the slow movement of the sun through these constellations of the zodiac that the equinox comes from. It's a pretty tedious thing to explain in any detail. I try to do it in a few pages in the book without getting too mathematical. But it's a change of time that we see, a change of the sky. The constellations change, and it makes you kind of feel unstable. You know, you think you'd have a solid ground to walk on. It's a long cycle. It's longer than the long count. In fact, it's almost exactly 5 times the long count. So the Maya may have known about precession. They may well have known about it and used the long count cycle as a way of reckoning it. But I don't think much of the other baggage about their predicting the end of the world comes with it. Did I answer your question satisfactorily enough?
So it refers to the Earth rotating around what?
Well, the Earth's rotating its axis. Okay, it's spinning on its axis. So here's the axis spinning day after day after day. The axis itself wobbles like a top. You know, you take a child's top, or a gyroscope is another good thing. It takes 20,000 years, 26,000 years for that axis to make one path around the sky. And it sketches out a cone on the sky marked by different stars. Now, in the meantime, while that axis moves around, so too does the equator. And as the equator moves around, it's what changes these locations of the sun on different days of the year. So while the sun on the first day of spring is now in Pisces, which happens to be my sign because I'm born in March, it used to be in Taurus back in Egyptian times. So if I were born in ancient Egypt, born in March, my sign would have been Taurus, because that's where the equinox was. So it's a slow movement of the equinox. But is it an indication that the ages of humanity are star-fixed? Cosmic determinism, that's the big question. Other, yes? And then I'll go here.
So it's your contention that we in North America are more susceptible to the seduction of this kind of construction. That certainly you lay a case for that, attaching to kind of history of religious fanaticism and radicalism. But what else does it attach to is what my question, because I think that may explain a certain undercurrent which underlays all of American culture, but it attaches to other things beside. I wonder what you thought.
Well, I think that I would say that it is America's openness to all of these diverse religions, which is a very hot topic of discussion today. I'm not talking about in history, which allowed people to come here who had ideas that were not acceptable in the home culture, in this case in the Netherlands and in England. And so certainly my case is that a lot of the interest in apocalyptic ideas comes from that. Now, when you lay on top of that a time of great uncertainty, a time of fear, something's about to happen. You don't have to even tune in CNN to see that. There's everything that's out there will scare the wits out of you. Something's going to happen. Are the earthquakes getting more frequent? That terrible tsunami that they had in Indonesia, when's that going to happen again? And when you get, I will say this, when you get some people who play on those fears, then you really have a kind of epidemic of fear and panic that leads us to this apocalypticism. So I think the two root elements here are American religion and as well the times. Because, you know, in the 60s when Hamlet's Mill was written, that was the era of Vietnam protests, which was up until this decade in my life was the most uneasy time in my culture that I can remember. And I was still teaching at that time. Well, it's been topped by 9/11. So I think it's a combination of things. There may be other factors here that weigh in, but to me it's an interesting coincidence. Of course, on top of that you have the internet, which makes everybody's idea equal, so that whatever anybody has to say on a blog or on a website is as good as my idea. I had Daniel Pinchbeck, who's an advocate of lysergic acid, tells me in his book, one of his books, The Return of Quetzalcoatl, 2012, we were on Montel Williams together, which I'll never do again, and he said to me, look, Aveni, you may have studied his Maya writing, and you know the Maya writing, you know the cultures and stuff, but until you have tripped and gone into the transcendent, I was told not to mention this to the students, how I did it. He said, until you've tripped, and you won't understand the Maya. Now, what we have here are positions that are irreconcilable. There's no way I can recognize my way of knowing, which happens to be based on what I call evidence, with his way of knowing, which is tripping on lysergic acid. We can't get together. You go with him, you go with me. Right now, he's got me beat 90-10 in the latest poll. I think it's 92-8, excuse me.
I was just wondering, it seemed like we're putting out these and different cultures of apocalyptic cultures, but so then what would you say exactly makes those, why do they all seem to relate back to like the astrolog and galactic stuff?
Well, you know, if you study the calendars, I wrote a book called Empires of Time, in which I talk about where timekeeping comes from. So many calendars begin not millions of years ago, not centuries ago, but thousands of years ago. The Hebrew calendar, the Julian calendar, the Egyptian calendar, they all go back. The Maya calendar, 3114 BC. They all go back to a time large enough to stagger the imagination, large enough to stagger the imagination of those who invented it. And I think for a native Maya or an Egyptian of those days to say we go back 3,000 years is astronomical. Of course, our creation story goes back 14 billion years to the Big Bang. And that staggers me because I can't fathom how much 14 billion is, but evidently you follow the expanding universe, well, that's what it all points to. I think that it begins not so much with science and astronomy, it really begins with politics and with the idea of those who rule and have power to perpetuate their power. And I think it's about the perpetuation of power. To do that, you've got to connect yourself to a beginning of time that just knocks people over. If I can convince you people I'm descended from Moses, I'm going to get a lot more for my book. You know, I can charge double for that. And I really think that's got something to do with it. It's human nature. Good question. Yes?
When Halley's Comet first came around, there was a lot of fear associated with that, and then it was kind of a disappointment when it came around again. I think there's also this preoccupation with being hit by an asteroid. And is there anything in reality of astronomical research that shows the possibility or probability of being hit, having a major hit by an asteroid?
Yeah, and I mean, now of course, thank you for pointing out yet another item on the list of things to worry about. Wasn't Halley's Comet a bust, though? Yes. We went all the way to Trinidad. It was a tiny, puny thing. But anyway, that's another issue. I'm still angry over that. Wait till 2061, it'll be a little better. Of course there are odds. But to play the game, you've got to see how big a thing do you want to get hit by. And you can make these computations, they're all statistical. So you can say, well, to get hit by a megaton bomb-sized asteroid, that's going to happen once every 10,000 years. You make a statistical calculation of how many objects there are roaming around out there, their speeds, their direction, the gravitational field, and so on. Now, when you crank it up to 1,000 megatons, that can demolish a good part of Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, and maybe even Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, do away with New England forever if it hits here. Probability is small that it will hit because the world is 3/4 water, ocean anyway. Then you're talking about perhaps once on the order of every 500,000 or 250 to 500,000 years. So yes, there's a possibility, but what do the media tell us? There was one last week. I mean, an asteroid came within the distance of the moon and it was the size of that chair. I mean, these are things that to me are over-reported. Yes, there are cosmic dangers, but I think that that we focus too much attention on them. But that's another example. So in the long run, it's not a very large, I wouldn't go out and buy an insurance policy about getting hit. But did you know that there is one human being who was hit by an object from space? Mrs. Hewlett Hodges, 1957, Huntsville, Alabama, smote on the thigh by a meteorite that crashed through the roof of her house, bounced off her dresser. It was a picture of Life magazine when we were seeing it as a kid. And hit her on the hip, and there's a big picture of her. Well, she was a big woman to begin with. Picture of her in Life magazine showing this large fruit on her hip, so she was, talk about bad luck. Odds are not bad. Better you should worry about driving home in the dark. Yes?
Can you give us a sense of what the technologies were at the time that the Maya were making these predictions, and just to give some context, I think we've come a long way from there, but our meteorologists are still having trouble predicting a hurricane, so
That's very good. Well, you're all able to hear that. I should be repeating these if you're not, but it's about the technology. And I'm fond of telling my students that one of the reasons for our fascination with the Maya is that they were able to accomplish all of these things without the use of very much technology. At least nobody's excavated a computer or a telescope or a microscope. There has been no excavation of any astronomical instrument, not even a pair of sticks with which to sight anything. How did they do it? How did they do it? Here we are, trapped in a techno-culture, believing that we can't tell anything if we don't have our cell phone or our laptop. We can't do a thing. How did they do it? They did it by repeated observation. And I want to give you a good answer to this because this is a very important question. For example, you can hear on these History Channel programs that the Maya could calculate the phases of the moon to an accuracy of 7 minutes. 7 minutes. How do you do it? Let's say you and I go out and observe a full moon, and we mark down on the calendar what the date is. It's going to be in a couple of weeks. We mark it down on the calendar. You and I go off separately, and we're going to record every night there's a full moon. So you record 31 days later there's a full moon. I record 30. Next month I record 29, you record 30. Then we both record 30. And I do 28, you record 29. If we take the average over about 5 years of the record of full moons, the distance, time between them, we're going to come out with an answer. I won't say it's accurate to 7 minutes. You've got to do it for about 25 or 30 years. But you attain that accuracy by time averaging, repeated observations made with the naked eye. And so you've got to be persistent, you've got to go out and watch these things, and you record the time when they occur. It's amazing how much astronomy you can do with the naked eye. But we've lost the use of the eye. We don't pay much attention to this. We read it in a book, or we look on a map, on a computer, and we see the galactic center, and it looks like a womb, so we say it is a womb, and the sun went there, and it blocked out the black hole. And I think that we need to use our eyes a little more. That's why I enjoy teaching science. You use your eye to see things in astronomy. So glad you asked the question. Very little technology. Sir?
Am I allowed 2 questions?
I just consult with the chairman, who's on Skype here. He says, sure, do it.
Oh, yeah.
And then there was somebody here. I'll go there. Yeah, yes.
So,
what's your second question? You already asked your first.
The first question, I believe you said that the beginning of the Mayan calendar was something like 3,000.
3114 BC.
3114.
August 11th.
August 11th. And presumably that date was chosen because in Mayan history something significant happened. What was that significant happened?
What was the significance of what happened on August 11th, 3114 BC? I don't know. I can tell you that it's nothing having to do with the sky that I know anything about, unless it's some obscure thing. You got to take a lesson from our own calendar. I think when you study other people's language or calendar, you look at your own. Where do we get the year 2010 from? Well, when Christ was born, did people say, well, okay guys, this is 1, and next year will be 2. Well, no, they didn't. In the 6th century AD, Dionysius Exiguus Eastern Holy Roman Empire, also known as Dennis the Short. Love that. Dennis the Short was commissioned to task, or maybe he was commanded by the emperor, to make a chronology that was based on years. What did they do before that? Well, they wrote in the reign of so-and-so, the king of, and this reign, and that reign begat whom, the same way you have in Genesis. And he sat down and calculated all the begats, and came to the conclusion that Christ was born in 0. In fact, he was born in 4 BC, we now know with some accuracy. And so that was the back-calculated date, the putative birth of the Savior of Catholic religion, of Christian religion. Now, what was it with the Maya? Well, there's been a lot of thought about this, and there's no agreement, but we think it may have been some date of historical significance that was back-calculated. In other words, let's say, I'm just going to make this up, the birthday of an emperor, the birthday of a ruler of the dynasty, which happened to be on the year 4 Ahau 8 Kunku in the Maya calendar, and they said, well, let's make 0 be a 4 Ahau 8 Kunku day. So then they have to back-calculate these numbers to come to that point. It also may have been a back-calculation from a round number of the long count. 76000 has been proposed. That is 7 scores of years, 6 scores of years, and so on. 76000 projected back to a name day and a name of the month day. But we don't know the answer to that. We don't know. But it certainly didn't happen in 3114 BC. And it's not astronomical. Our Julian calendar has 3 elements that are cycled. 2 of them have to do with astronomy. The third has to do with a 15-year cycle of indiction, which is the cycle of payment of retired military officers in the Roman army. Who would have thought that politics would enter into a back calculation? That's why I like to study our calendar. It gives us these lessons about, we think these Mayas so pure and esoteric and knowing all this. And the Romans are using the cycle of pay for military officers as a cycle. It's like bizarre. Thanks.